Welcome to Coursera. This is a class that can be taken through Harvard, USC, Calarts, and local commuted credit from wherever you live. Can be applied to those schools on Coursera, unless your own school takes Coursera, which can also apply a certain amount of credits. But as we get closer to the finals, I'll explain how credits a lot and how long we're going to run this class for specifically Harvard, USC, and Calarts. But I'd like to take a moment and switch gears on the lecture. I'm sure you don't mind the loud rock and roll music that I did myself. It's my 14th album, Zodiac Dealer, and this was written by my lyric writer, Mark Frederick, but we got to get into criticism here. And I know that Harvard specifically liked the Dead Tell Your Writers. And this is a TV book that I got from one of my professors back that goes to Austin College, Austin University in Texas, and he put together an edited book. His name is Ethan Thompson. It's Thompson, and you can kind of see his name on here, but I can't quite get it to glow on the screen. So this is called How to Watch Television, and the title is sarcastically ironic in a detached way on purpose, but there's so much packed into this. I mean, there's reasons. They explain everything from like why Family Guy has so many doggedly done flashbacks or flash forwards or just mind screens that are in like a dream that take place in an alternate reality that we already are so accustomed for going into these assisted realities, these second realities. They come back into the main show and nothing has changed. And even if it has, from the vision that they had, talking about showing something that they're illustrating Peter's thinking or saying, that somehow triggers a whole other episode, and we still take it for the episode outside of the episode, even though it's all in one seamless show that they edit. That's in here. There's an article by Dana Poland, Dr. Poland from NYU, has an article about a cooking show that nobody's seen, barely anybody had archived. It's hard to remember what the name of it. It was like How to Cook, and sadly I'd have to go into the book, and this is open book, but I don't remember the name of the woman that was the cook, but she seemed to have great recipes. And she was throwing together these delicious meals, and she had a really popular underground show, but it was a legit cooking show. And he's like, you got to scour for endlessly through TV archives and museums, this labyrinth maze of reading culture that goes on. And Dr. Poland said that finding gems like that cooking show, even though the editing's kind of bad, the lighting's off, the camera's all tilted, it's better than watching, or as good as watching some other things that's on TV, but that you're learning how to cook these wonderful recipes, and that the low values on the show are kind of, if not totally intentional. I could see why I would search mazes of shows to stop at that one. But there's so much to this book, I can't get into it all. So I'm going to take a quick approach and say my mentor at Calarts, Dr. Wagner, Dr. John Wagner, J-O-N, spent years writing this book on TV, and it is perfect. It's a way better TV criticism than I could give. And I've heard Dr. McPherson from USC has great TV theory, but this is the book that talks about how cinema really competed as a medium in the theater to take the biggest screen out, to take the hypercolor out, and use it to sell theater tickets when they're up against TV. But that theater and TV were even competing at all. TV didn't really look at itself as a competition, but nor as a handmaiden, as some of these texts have said. But TV's always kind of had an interest of its own that's been great in its own way. But that cinema was offended by TV, I don't understand either where that came from. Maybe there were some network decisions where TV was suddenly making more commercial money than theater. What's wrong with that? Just because it's another medium, it can make more money. But cinema put out these theater movies like Network, which I love Network. We're going to talk about it later, but Network all shows the evils of TV and how evil TV is, and how every channel you go to is like basically watching the God and the devil duke it out on Revelation. And you know what, man? That's why I love TV, is every show's about God and the devil duking it out in Revelation. Now we come to this box. that I got from my very friendly cousin, Sheley. And she bought this for me while I was making a show with her. And we'll go into my show a little bit today because it's important to internet media. And the New York Drama Critics Circle really liked it, which I'm like a spearhead member of that group, not even living in New York, and I'm piping you these Harvard classes from Colorado. But what I want to cover about my show is that it was guerrilla in the sense that we went everywhere and filmed everything we wanted to in the like small amounts of time because we got such large amounts of time on footage, and that we were realistic, as in like realism, as in not we were slightly surreal in some of our horror movies in the show, but the show is a panoply of realism. It's like if you were to use a pen and write down what's happening around you in a diary journal, you could keep track of what's going on in our shows. And though I'm supposed to write some big treatise on what it's all about, I'm not sure. That it's two badass businesses, and that they're my two cousins, and they just go around doing cool stuff. And it doesn't really have to do with like any R-rated theme. It's pretty much a PG-13 show, but the language borders on R. Some of the soundtracks we use everything from Pantora to Tool to like, Michael Jackson and Lady Gaga and Eminem. I got control of the YouTube Masterclass, so they just let us keep sliding these songs through. And some that you would think would be really hard to get are easier than you think. And I've played Beatles, and I've played operas, and I've gotten licenses. And there's some licenses that have thrown me off that I'm not going to discuss. But Two Badass Businesses is not just amazing for its soundtrack. Visually, it's what they call surreal, a realist. It's realist medium, realistic. And it's also obscured in the fact that there is a little bit of editing, there is a little bit of mystery, there's a little left off screen. People kind of wonder, but it's so exciting. All the visuals on screen are so like song, dance, fireworks, things exploding. It's a regular day of the week and everybody's in action. And it takes you to the mountains and takes you to the land of Grand Junction in its various forms, Main Street, CMU. That it's guerrilla in that we film everything we possibly can, but that it's like neo-realism at the same time because we keep it about the things we film without really mechanically altering them until season 3, which becomes a little more surreal, and then 4 goes into the movie edits, which are actually 10 films of the Orgy of the Damned series that we've already discussed. That is all Two Badass Businesses. I'm leaving to be desired the exact way I describe it yet, so let's move on to some TV shows that are bigger and badder and crazier than even my own. And Battlestar Galactica, which is in How to Watch Television, is next. And just because the informal style of overdevelopment versus underdevelopment has never really reflected on TV, we have a theatrically crafted sci-fi show in the vein of Star Trek and Star Wars. And really, if I were to name my best shows, my favorites, Twilight Zone, Star Trek, and Battlestar Galactica is in that same realm, but it's later on in cinema, and this is a newer version, and this is season 1. So that just goes to show you how many shows they make in a TV series and how many shows there are, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 discs, and they all contain more than one episode, and they have several episodes per disc. There's 4 episodes per disc on this one, and that's 4 of them, so that's 16 plus 17. There's like a lot of episodes in this one season. My show only had 4 seasons, like Twin Peaks, and we'll get to Twin Peaks, but that guerrilla cinema can sometimes match with this neorealist form is something I'm going to come back to. But this is a formal construct of like aliens versus warlords versus Dune versus all these like Battlefield Earth, Mission Earth type things by L. Ron Hubbard. All these shows about how we would navigate through time and space if we're going to against aliens. That weren't pretty accurate as to how the science works, but not really predicting that would happen in the future because men are already in their own ways and kind of wouldn't really be changed by aliens, as the Day the Earth Stood Still shows. But this shows us crossing boundaries and going to new places and seeing beautiful people and meeting aliens that are going to help us meeting aliens that are bad. It's a show with a little bit of soap opera to it in outer space, but that's cool because we all like to see good-looking men, good-looking chicks in outer space. But that they're fighting battles, that they're going through changes, is a theme of these shows that came around at this time that this one did, and even goes all the way to Game of Thrones, that there's something new and climactic about the first episode that stays climactic through the second episode, and then a new climax rises, and that conflict resolution doesn't take place except where the writer wants it to. And the unique thing about TV show writers is how they build climaxes and where their conflict resolution is. They build their conflict, in this one with spaceships attacking, their conflict resolution is to blow up every spaceship in the galaxy. And that's why it's Battlestar Galactica, straight out of like the mindset of like Star Wars Episode 4, where there's like some strategic puzzle laid on the light bulb that like changes when C-3PO sees that they should move the ships over here. And by the way, nobody ever gave C-3PO credit for moving the ships in Star Wars Episode 4, but he found the pattern that would fly them in based on the Rogue One movie to blow up the Death Star. So that's how underrated C-3PO is. So you're forgiven for having your head torn off and becoming one of those clone things in Attack of the Clones. But this is Battlestar Galactica, and I will say that this article on how to watch television, which you should buy this book if you can find it from Amazon, please do, because it will tell you the true story of Battlestar Galactica, and all I can say is the special effects are great, cutting-edge music, beautiful talent, traditional quality TV, but traditional quality not in a way that would annoy Truffaut. Traditional quality in a way that we're making classical sci-fi in a modern sci-fi setting. So, there was this one year I was going to school at the University of Southern California undergrad, and I'd just gotten through like watching like a marathon of Kenneth Anger films. I think I saw all of them, and I've missed a couple. It still seems there's more coming out of some vault, and that he destroyed so many of his films is something that's really important. But that he didn't really work in TV, I'm not so sure. Some of those guys were shown on public access channels without even knowing it. But The Twilight Zone came on as... I mean, we all love screamo music, but that's a little screamy. Even I have to scream to be heard over my screams. So, that's cool. I mean, I like hard rock, and this CD really rocks. Yeah, so I'm not going to deny that, but Twilight Zone. I saw this marathon right after... I saw the Kenneth Anger marathon, and then 6 months later, on the TV, when I'm about to go travel to Colorado, which is where I am now, I freaking turn on TV, and it's Sci-Fi Channel, of course, and I'm not really sure if Sci-Fi Channel is spelled S-Y-F-Y now, or S-C-I-F-I, like I use the word in a book, like it's interchangeable with the sci-fi genre. And I don't know how long they've been using the word sci-fi to describe science fiction, but it makes sense to use that. But it seems like it was ever since I was a kid. But it seems like maybe the word sci-fi might have developed into that. And then we all just took the Sci-Fi Channel for real. And now that it's S-Y-F-Y, it kind of precludes to one of their shows in some marathon that I haven't seen. And that really scares me, because the Twilight Zone marathon that I did sit through was the best adventure I've had in a long time with movies. I mean, like TV shows. And these TV shows that are demeaned by, you know, a movie like King of Comedy. I mean, I love those movies that talk bad about TV, but why they're talking bad about TV makes no sense. Because, like, not only did TV get most of its technique from cinema in terms of a one-camera setup, or whether it's a wall-to-wall setup of lights, that's from theater. They shouldn't have really minded that TV was exploring subjects that were off the wall, because cinema was trying to go off the wall, saying that TV explored off the wall subjects, and cinema always goes off the wall. I mean, you know how I was talking about that cinema technique where you're driving a big train and you just can't resist but to crash it and blow it up like Bridge on the River Kwai. Build one big train set with a real train and blow it up. It's like Orson Welles' ideal for a movie, besides having like an eyeball at the beginning and saying it's you, and you're walking through this dark passage tunnel, you know, and you're seeing from a character's point of view, the eye of the character is seeing the world. And now you're like in this Humphrey Bogart's head, but you never see him except when he looks in the mirror. And who knows, we're pretty sure that was him, that we were inside his head. But Twilight Zone has episodes like that. It has everybody's favorite, the Hangman Western episode where they're traveling through time. There's tons of time travel in it. Battlestar Galactica has interplanetary travel, which changes the time zones around a little bit, like you'll see in other sci-fi movies like Dune and Star Wars. Excuse me, but Twilight Zone is on such a narrative base that you're getting this whole short story version of a story like Tales from the Crypt. But you're getting the stories told by these directors who are serious about TV and serious about film, and so many good film directors came from TV, and we don't even have to say that they were bad on TV, because, like, you know, I know Sam Peckinpah came from TV, but his show, The Rifleman, isn't too bad. And then you look at the director, Robert Altman, and you're just like, wow, he directed on TV too, and like that later MASH became a show no one was bothered with, that it was, maybe it wasn't as good as the movie, but the movie didn't take time sitting there going like they reshooting it because they said that the TV show was better or worse. It's a more cooperative version of like how MASH was a great movie and a great TV series, and no one ever tried to like overstep the other one or show anybody up. They just had a good idea, they ran with it in a different way in the show, still perfectly akin to the original. We all love both. That's the way I see it. But Twilight Zone has episodes about how music puts people in a trance that reminds me of Kurt Vonnegut, but he probably got it from Twilight Zone. That so many sci-fi authors that were writing on the underground, which sometimes there are underground sci-fi authors that we don't know about, and they wrote in for Twilight Zone shows, and, you know, all these guys that were producing it were like, yeah, we want your scripts for Twilight Zone, and they twist them all together and use them in unusual ways and fake who wrote them. You know, I look back, and that's really that whole marathon, seeing every episode of Twilight Zone and kind of remembering little things here and there about the different ones. I mean, like, I had a Lost in Space marathon, and I almost saw the whole thing, but like I kept waiting till like midnight to watch the last few episodes, and then I'd trace out like one of the characters in the show falling asleep before the end, you know. It's, you know, like Alfred Hitchcock, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, he said TV's a little itty bitty box to fall asleep in front of. And I think that's a really good way to prove that he must have been watching Lost in Space, because that's the only show that puts you to sleep, because you have to go to cryogenic sleep sometimes during space travel. Everybody knows that that was the secret reason they were always falling asleep, and we're always falling asleep to the show Lost in Space. Star Trek, where do I begin? Man, this is Rod Serling, and this could be the greatest show on television ever, the first series. I like all the other series. I happen to know a few people that worked on some of the later episodes and some of the even newer ones, and some of the people that work on that are really good examples of writing and fictitious on a level of science fiction that is just like mind-blowing, that the show itself is so much more exciting than even going to see the movies from the early times with the original cast of Kirk and Spock being William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy. And that they commanded the set rather well for it being one of their first episodes in the 60s. And that in the 60s, it's hard to say that a show was that advanced. Even by today's level, it seems pretty advanced. And that they flew all around the galaxy and didn't really always explain, but eventually got around to tuning up the ship every episode before they departed Earth. And the tuning up of the ship was always one of the conflict resolution climax agendas of the early part of the show. That they get the ship going and get where they need to go and are blocked by Klingons is usually what happens, because they're way out in outer space and now they're suddenly blocked by Klingons. So that they get the phasers out and shoot the Klingons out. But the Klingons are attacking them anyway from their ships. And they realize they're shooting at the ships of the Klingons, even though they just saw a giant head of a Klingon on the holodeck, which is where you talk to people over the holodeck. And, you know, that every episode includes that doesn't write out the fact that every episode has yet another, like Twilight Zone. Every script is beautiful, and we've used everything from our fan cult to our members to psychedelic adventures, whatever. We've resorted to writing Star Trek episodes that are going to break down barriers of TV, and that's why I love that it has the multiracial code in Star Trek, because even though it's a little bit overrun by these theater types, you know, this the ladies are from the theater too, and they're treated on the same level. Like women are equal in the future in Star Trek. It's weird. And races are equal in Star Trek. It's really weird. And you can't really be poor, but that doesn't matter anyway because they land on planets and help them out like they're the Peace Corps anyway. And I don't really think there's anything bad I could say about the show or the movies or the levels after, but the original show was it for me in TV. I mean, that was when I knew TV was an art form and was, for better or worse, like almost a different medium. And it's almost like composing in TV, which I've had a little luck doing with some PBS work. But even that's intense and hard because you got to stay at your cut that you turn in, the version of the film that you turn in, you have to stick with it. And then if it changes, you have to shuffle it back to the studio, and it gets really difficult. And Star Trek just makes it look seamless. They have camera editing like they're in a movie with the one camera setup. Sometimes they flatten out a wide version of inside the ship, the Enterprise, SS Enterprise, which they're still flying in Next Generation, and give over the ship in First Contact, we all know. But that the show spawned a religion cult and fans that are called Trekkies and Trekkers. I'm not going to get into too much, although Trekkers go along with the shows and watch them all, and Trekkies know everything about Trek. And I've seen most of the shows down to Voyager, but I know they've had several shows after it, says the typical Star Trek fan. But that I'm a rabid fan of the original show is underestimated in me because I'm a rabid fan of Star Trek. The show, the motion picture's really good. Robert Wise directed that. He was the guy that directed Sound of Music. And where they're searching for pure logic in the movie is good, but that they have the Trouble with Tribbles episode in the original Star Trek series, maybe season 2, although season 1, we all know, of the original Star Trek is the best TV ever made. Because you're sitting there going, we just flew to the Klingons, we just phasered them out, we're working on the ship the whole episode, everybody's humoring each other with each other's favorite person, each other that are gracing their presence with, but that they love to have around. That they're all friends on the ship and they're all getting together. I can't come right now. And that they're all getting together on the show. Sorry, there's always these interruptions here. I live in this building and there's other people, and no harm, no foul. But that Star Trek devotes so much time and effort into its construct, and that Twilight Zone does too, and even these shows like Lost in Space and Battlestar Galactica have great production design. So far, notarizing several shows, I haven't really noticed a political structure that would offend film. So who in the film business really got offended by TV? Why? Because it's making more money? Because it's an art form of its own? And I think the answer could be related to the fact that a Mormon invented TV, and he didn't know what he had, but he was using it to watch his crops. And I never remember his name. It's like some funny Mormon name, and he seemed like a cool dude and invented TV. And then next thing you know, they're using it for one of my favorite shows that didn't develop until a little while into the dawn of TV. And that's Playhouse 90. Playhouse 90 is an interesting show because it's traditional quality movie making, although they do use a modern form. And that it's usually in black and white conceals that color films were out before they really sold a lot of color TVs. But that TVs could be in the home is an idea that they love in Japan, like with the Ozu movie Floating Weeds. But in America, owning a TV in the 50s is like having a jukebox arcade with AI tell you what to watch and what to do. in a Douglas Sirk movie called All That Heaven Allows, which again is making this monstrous obsession with TV become destructive. And we're all wondering, well, maybe that's because Twilight Zone and Star Trek are monstrously destructive in ways because they blow up planets and then they get blown up and then they spend the next episode fixing it and finding tribbles. Anyway, so we're moving on to Playhouse 90, and they set up these sets that are like all over, and they're all like playground sets, and they have like these, but they're not playgrounds. What they say that, but they're theaters. And they set up these beams, and it's like the John Houseman Company with Orson Welles and John Cassavetes we talked about. And they set up these big constructs, and they're like setting up these theater shows. Like one will be a bunkhouse, and Andy Griffith will be in it, and it's like this army movie that he's in where it's a real tough to be in the army, and it's almost got this full metal jacket kind of swag to it, and it's kind of like he's like a really tough veteran, you know. They're really playing it methodically, like where they got the social reality, the social construct of the Boleshavsky Stanislavski school we talked about in Taxi Driver. And I'm not necessarily talking about ideology. I'm talking about studying how someone works as an actor and playing. Like if I was the taxi driver, I would follow taxi drivers around and get in touch with some taxi drivers to see how they act. Then I would take the political social side and become a taxi driver so I can see what one's like. And the next thing you know, you're driving around in a taxi, in Taxi Driver, and they're making a movie about you, and you're an actual taxi driver. That's the trick nobody understands about that film. Forget the triple ironic ending of Taxi Driver. That Robert De Niro was really a taxi driver and that he'd been driving taxi for 3 months. I mean, if he was driving taxi for 3 months, then they're really making a movie about a real taxi driver, and that's Robert De Niro. Whether he was making money at it or not, it seems like he was because he could stop at the coffee shop and get an arsenal of weapons and things like that. But Playhouse 90 has exciting shows too. The original Day of Wine and Roses was on Playhouse 90, and I don't know if the Blake Edwards one or the original Playhouse 91 of Days of Wine and Roses was better, but I could say that they're both really dramatic and depressing, and they're about like real issues with alcoholism, like kind of like D.W. Griffith's struggle. And that wasn't really prohibition, wasn't really the angle of Griffith. He was just saying alcohol hurts you, but later Griffith didn't like Reefer Madness that was saying weed turns you into a monster. Personally, I don't like that film. I'll laugh at it just like anybody else. It's funny to watch these people say that people that smoke pot do and act in certain unusual behaviors, but if unusual is laughing at a comedy and eating Cheetos, bro, I'm in, man. Anyway, Playhouse 90 has that Days of Wine and Roses thing. Yeah, we all know alcohol can go bad sometimes when we run out and we get mad at everybody around us. That's alcoholism, where you got to avoid the getting mad at everybody just because you don't have the alcohol. I mean, if it does that to you, then it's going to turn you, as a film buff, right in front of Days of Wine and Roses, Playhouse 90 style, and the later Blake Edwards style. And then it'll go straight from that to Leaving Las Vegas. And you won't really mind that you're a drinker at that point because you're like, I don't drink as much as that dude. I'm just kidding. Twin Peaks is one we're talking about next, and I don't have an example of that box, but we need to talk about Twin Peaks, and I'm not sure if it was covered in How to Watch Television, but it was talked about somewhere in that index of the similar shows. And Ethan Thompson did tell me that Twin Peaks was hard to analyze because it seems apolitical, like most David Lynch. If David Lynch is apolitical, he still has a zen ability to meditate and turn it into something in motion that looks different than anyone else could arrange just through meditation. That David Lynch meditates to set up the shot. Somehow the shot gets set up and he films it just like he wants to while he's meditating and under his own self-hypnosis. I mean, that takes a lot of skill. And for the whole show, Twin Peaks, to look like David Lynch is meditating and self-hypnotized is precisely what you see in the image. The image brings about David Lynch's reality of a small town in Colorado, which I've been to, but I don't know if that's where they filmed the show. It looks like they filmed the show in LA, where they filmed most of these other shows, except for in New York was the center of these shows. So they were actually Playhouse 90 and Twilight Zone and Star Trek, or New York-based shows. But that they had LA cooperation is similar to how there's New York studios, like Troma is in New York, but I worked for the LA office, but that I'm still an employee at all is a miracle, you know. But that Troma did a show called Edge TV is important to TV history because not many people know about it, and it fought every rule of censorship and won by going to the BBC late at night during these like 2001, 2002 strikeouts of all these bad words on TV that everybody was getting nailed for. Troma's just like, hey, give it to Great Britain for free and we'll bomb it with all these like cool like clips of like total debauchery. It was cool HTV, but you know what was an even better show? Not just Twin Peaks, but there was a show called Paper Tiger, and what I liked about it, I'm not really, I know I talked about Battleship Potemkin and some Russian movies and stuff, My Name is Ivan and stuff, for still photography and whatever else. But Paper Tiger doesn't really bother me in a communist way because sometimes communism can seem oppressive in that Apocalypse Now, Chairman Mao kind of scariness kind of way. But Paper Tiger doesn't bother me in that I've seen the photo at a museum in France of the Paper Tiger wall, of the giant tiger in the wall that's ripped up at the bottom. And you see the tiger in the picture, and that really is only to illustrate that it's an Asian tiger, and it's these underground LA and New York TV writers, which there's more to say about the LA writers, but most of the TV writers, TV networks, and TV distributors were out of New York, which was already evil to Hollywood because Hollywood's going, we can help you with your shows, but we're going to have to make movies to totally ream you from almost some house on un-American activities like just they're going to make everybody a communist. Well, Paper Tiger is cool about the 80s because by the time it started in the 60s and was still going on, and sometimes they still make episodes, it's cool to be whatever, political party you want to be at this time. Now, we all know today it's not cool to be whatever political party you want to. But that in the 80s it kind of was, though people were kind of annoyed by it. Nobody could deny that Paper Tiger had the most realistic news, and some of it was like catastrophically scary, and some of it was really good news about like how they saved a species of butterflies, and they just wanted the world to know how beautiful butterflies are, and they're just going to throw butterflies out on the picture. But then they'd show like some giant butterfly up close under a lens, shows they were experimenting with a lot of camera angles. A lot of things were going on with Paper Tiger. And then it's this show that expresses a different point of view in politics is really interesting because you don't want to really get involved with these politics because they seem kind of radical, but it doesn't come on in an oppressive join or die reefer madness kind of way. Now, one show that I kind of haven't talked about that's really important, and we're going to keep going for a little while here because I got to cover Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I can't come right now. Meet me in 5 minutes.
Oh, it's me, Deidre.
I know, I'm shooting a film in here.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Sorry about that again. There's a lot of people that live here and nobody meant anything by it. No harm, no foul. So anyways, we're going right on. I keep getting knocked on, and I apologize for that. It's a low-budget rigged set, and I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble, nor myself, by getting knocked on. They're just checking to do some regular things. It's cool. So we're into Paper Tiger, and the show throws butterflies at you, and then there's this catastrophic news on the other hand about this like leveled out places and buildings and war zones and everything, and that caught on to the regular evening news. And I'm not saying that like realism or this extreme form of realism that we're going to look up some things for next time about, but can't be on TV because they actually showed like the moon landing on TV, and everybody knows it was real, and it looked cheaper than 2001: A Space Odyssey, but you could tell it was expensive to get cameras in space, and that they even got cameras in space not to explode is no event to, dude, other countries have a space program too. They have cameras in space too. There's cameras in space. I'm sorry to offend everyone with this theory, but there's cameras in space. There's satellites in space too that carry around giant beams of information. Clouds of internets are stored on these satellites. Even if the world was destroyed, the internet would float off on a satellite. And everything that's ever been on the internet would still exist on one of those satellites. Now, those satellites are safe because they're way out in outer space, but that to admit that there's a satellite for a television is controversial because we don't believe in outer space. I mean, maybe I don't believe in outer space either. I've never been there. But that there are satellites in outer space can be verified, and you can actually see them up in the sky blinking. So, anyways, Schoolhouse Rock. Schoolhouse Rock is a cartoon. They show all these different characters that are teaching problems of mathematics, science, uh, library sciences, a lot of library sciences. Schoolhouse Rock actually started out as a show on library science and how to check out books and how to take books back and where to find hard to find books and how to find books at all and what kind of card catalog you're using and whether it's Library of Congress or Dewey Decimal or whatever. You have to know these things, but they teach you in Schoolhouse Rock how to use a library. So then later they teach you how to write a paper, and you got to know how to write a paper because everybody's written tons of papers. Trust me on this one, I've written so many papers in college that by the time I totaled more papers than anybody there combined, they're like, now you got to write 10 times as much to get it done. I'm like, you're saying I wrote 10 times as much as the last guy that got it done, and now I got to write 10 times more? Welcome to Schoolhouse Rock. You're all going to love it because you're all going to go in singing and doo-dopping a song and dropping an A plus on a math test just from hearing a bewitching song from Schoolhouse Rock. I can dig. And there's Sesame Street that I've actually made an experimental episode of that into a horror film, Sesame Street, but it wasn't scary. It was more like a suspense thriller where all the young people were turned into like these hypnotized people and that they're getting these Sesame Street songs was beautiful, and it reminds me of this background noise that we filmed with the rock song. And we did use some of these rock songs into Badass Businesses, but you got to realize Two Badass Businesses was before the time the Dead Telluride really got back together because they were still relying on the second or first album for scores. And then all these films later got scores from the Zodiac Dealer that we're hearing now to the Drink the Kool-Aid CD we heard in a couple of episodes later. And I like the ambiance, and I apologize for shouting at the beginning because I was trying to get over this wall of sound, but we've covered a lot. I have two more shows to talk about, and then three actually. First of all, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Alfred Hitchcock Presents is a good show because every single one of them was overseen and overdrawn and overbugged by Hitch himself. So to say the TV is an object to fall asleep in front of is only a Lost in Space reference, I think, because Hitchcock worked so hard on his TV show that it became one of the best shows ever. That some of it can seem less dicey today is not necessarily true if you pay attention to what's going on with the dialogue, which seems intentionally drab and probably is, but not in an Alfred Hitchcock, let's make it drab. It's like a Peyton Place, everything's going wrong, but this time we're admitting it is, unlike Peyton Place where everything goes wrong and they still say life is good. And you have this whole thing with Alfred Hitchcock Presents where no story is the same, and sometimes you use similar characters, sometimes you flash back, sometimes you go forward. But it's usually a suspense thriller, and that Alfred Hitchcock represents the whole nature of the suspense thriller is important because that roller coaster that you're riding was built by him to anticipate going upward, anticipating, and then going off the edge and flying downward is the shock and surprise, and then you get to the end and it stops and it concludes and getting off the coaster and you're still alive. You're watching a Hitchcock film. That his films have breakdowns of carnival rides like in Strangers on a Train is important to the fact that he's one of those build a train and crash it type cinema for the sake of cinema, no holds barred, nothing's gonna stop us now, let's make the fucking movie the way we want to, and that's what I love about Alfred Hitchcock. But his TV show, while not really restrained, and in some ways more cynical and dark than some of his movies like even The Trouble with Harry's dark, but some of this Hitchcock Presents is coming out at the same time. It's taking the edge from Twilight Zone away from being dark. That we've seen several episodes like the Cheney Vase and not many of the others can come right to mind is probably because we're never sure if those were the ashes of someone that she somehow wanted to hide the ashes of, or if there were even anything important in that vase, or whether it was a reference to like Notorious, where they hid the key and then they had to find the key to uncork the wine that had to break so they get the message. And it's kind of one of those related Schenectady things, but Schenectady key things. And that Playhouse 90 had all the ideals of theatrical realism. And that Alfred Hitchcock was totally a traditional qualityist in how he edited but still bugged the sets with multiple lights. And that a one camera setup doesn't mean you don't have multiple cameras, it just means you're playing each scene off of one camera, whereas a multiple camera setup, like you look at Scorsese's The Last Waltz, and I wouldn't be surprised if they showed it on PBS, and I'm probably dumb for not knowing that they have. But there's like all these, Vilma Zsigmond, one of Steven Spielberg's cinematographers, was there, and like they're all flying around on these giant like lifts and cranes, and they're going around and getting it. This is how a lot of TV award shows are filmed, and they'll have these sweeping cameras, and they'll have these cameras at these rock concerts with these cameras, and the setup is like you have these big boom cameras coming in over the crowd, and then you got the individual ones set up around the rock star or whatever that's doing the Super Bowl thing. Speaking of the Super Bowl thing, that leads me into the two last shows I got to talk about: Game of Thrones and Orange is the New Black. And I'm saying these are the ones where we got to stop the press. And I know How to Watch Television does admit that Orange is the New Black is one of the ones that's criticized the most. So I'm not going to say a lot about either one, but bear with me because we still got time. And we got a little bit of time to move on and go to the next thing, which I'm going back to film criticism next week. But don't be surprised if I give you more TV criticism, because I'm a TV and film fanatic, and that I've seen and gone places and dilemmas even to get Battlestar Galactica, which can be seen in my show that I make, is what a TV freak I am. And that there's more to say about TV animation would have to be a whole other episode. Game of Thrones does have a lot of CGI in it. I don't think it has much. It does have some AI in it, but in a special effecty kind of acceptable way. The script isn't AI. It's all original. It's J.R.R. And he writes those books, those Game of Thrones books. And from the first one to the last one, which I've seen about 97, 96% of that show, that I have some gaps around season 3 and season 7. The same gaps we all had because it gets really distracting on purpose. It's like if you're even watching this, you got to go do something else because somebody's hypnotized and totally stuck on the show, and they've got to like detach everybody from the show for a while, but totally intentionally just to bring them all back in for this brawl in season 8. And the whole season 8 brawl is like Army of Darkness meets Evil Dead, and there's just skeletons everywhere, smashing skeletons, and it's this big zombie skeleton do it all smash up, and they look like they're in a mosh pit at Slayer, and they're just smashing each other. And apart from that, everybody's naked, and everybody's doing it. Probably not for real, though. One thing you gotta realize about these Game of Thrones shows, they're not technically really porno, because even if they're really doing it, you gotta film, like, all the body parts for it to be porn, and forgive me for saying this, but I don't really look at much porn, but I didn't really mind that the active cast of Game of Thrones shows their whole body. That didn't really offend me. Spartacus, even on HBO, that kind of stuff doesn't offend me. Porn doesn't offend me, but I don't consider the erotic view of like nudity porn. And we can get into that if you want, but all I gotta say is that porn can be healthy if it's consensual porn. That there are critics even of TV and media that say it's bad because there is no consensuality in porn would be an argument you could make on a paper in like a class for race, class, and gender. Because I don't know about you, but like women don't really seem to be that into it. Maybe they are. That's cool if they are, but Most chicks I know are like distracted. And I could just be like an after school special, like Prohibitionist or something, but it just seems like women don't really look at men the same way who are totally hooked on porn. And I'm not saying that it's like something you got to get off of, because in a healthy way, if you're a couple and it helps you get an orgasm, and that's good. I'm just rooting out the fact that I've never seen anything non-consensual, but what I've seen of it doesn't really excite me. And that if it was non-consensual, it would be against a regulation that we'd all agree on. That censorship laws have gotten to the point that we can see Game of Thrones in its full glory. I'm in, dude. So, Orange is the New Black. That's another one we've got to cover before we wrap things up. Orange is the New Black. I had a marathon, watched them all. Had another marathon, watched half of them. Then season 8. And why Game of Thrones season 8 is the most hyped up, most amazing thing ever, I don't understand, because season 8 of Orange is the New Black is the most amazing thing I've ever seen, and that's because it's the riot that's been going on since end of season 6. The riot starts in season 7. The riot goes on in ways throughout the rest of the show, but kind of comes to a hedge in season 8, which is the full-fledged everybody's against everybody. And by the way, this show is about females in prison, and that it's the only show I could think of that makes up for the fact that Caged Heat is one of the most underrated movies ever made by Jonathan Demme, with Roger Corman producing it. He made it in a prison cell, and then there's all these montages that like Ozu cut from frame to frame of these beautiful women in prison that are totally like the werewolf women of the SS, but they're these big, strong women, and they're like really up to fight anything. And that it's an exploitation film doesn't make sense, because Jonathan Demme gives it this director flair that makes it look like an A-list movie, and probably is anyway. So now we're getting into the rugged warriors type of movie, when we thought Caged Heat was going to be like this bark lounger, just eroticism, which it still is. And then Caged Heat comes out with all these feminist theories that like these women are pumped up and they're strong and they don't even need men in the movie, and even evil women looking bad isn't always the case, because the evil women can be some of the good looking ones, and it's really to struggle against these supermodels that are stuck in prison but are really strong and can handle it. Well, Orange is the New Black is so extreme a case of that there's some cases of realism in the show that are verite, and that's where I was getting with the word neo-real. Verite is where you film it like it's really going on, and you take the camera down like Gospel according to St. Matthew. You set up this whole pageant play down by the docks, and then you say, by the time I'm down there, I'm going to come make it look like a documentary. You guys just reenact the Bible, and I'll come film it. I'll make it like a documentary, like they did with Gospel of St. Matthew. Well, they've been using that verite style with John F. Kennedy show, Primary, They've been doing that same version of the neo-real verite that we did that with Two Badass Visitors, and that was the other side of it. It was verite, it was guerrilla, and that we filmed everything and got it all done, and that's like trauma. But it's verite in a neo-real way, because it's everything that's happening while it's unwinding, and we didn't have a script. If you don't have a script, it can be verite, it can be a documentary. That shows that I'm not going to get into like Cops have a script. We can argue left and right. Cops has a script and they edit it together to make it look like that. But that they do a good reenactment, nobody really needs to know, because it kind of gives you a sour taste if it's not the real thing. I don't know why. Reenactments are what they do all the time with cinema, and everybody's cool with that. And if it's the real cops in a reenactment, that's pretty cool in the first place. I mean, if they had to reenact it, maybe that's why they're the way they are. But I don't know, some people don't like that show, do. I don't really mind it. I like Chips better. Chips are like even Cool Cops from the 70s, like Welcome Dano and all that shit. But Orange is the New Black has a lot of crazy things in it. While again, it doesn't have offensive nudity, I'd have to agree with that. Even that blue is the warmest color, as queer theory in cinema produces. Orange is the New Black is completely beset with language that only two females could express between each other, and there are things I don't understand that I'm not going to research to find out, because there are some things just for females to know, and I'm cool with that. That's a cool feminist tactic. They had things in that only females know about. I'm cool with that. I like movies like that. I don't have to understand everything they're saying in it, just because it's a secret code to women. I don't have to go look for the decoder book and be like, wow, can I be in the women's club? They're like, yeah, we can make you that way. And they're freaking beyond that because they're all in prison and they're all hooked up and they're all into each other and they're all trying to keep each other alive, and then it escalates and then sides get taken and people break up into cliques like they do in prison. And again, this is a lightweight version for a heavyweight show like this. Excuse me. To express that prison is not just a laughing matter, it's not just a depression, that it's worse than they could show in the film. And that's an argument I've made about war films. Wars like the Civil War was way worse than Birth of a Nation characterized it. Way more racist than Birth of a Nation characterized it. And way more of a rocky battle to fix everything afterwards than Birth of a Nation shows it. If you were to show the true story of the Civil War, you'd have to ban most of it. It was so grisly and even crazier than Game of Thrones. So, not saying that we want to impinge on violent episodes from war. It's just why they don't make them as crazy as they could be, because then we're getting to the point that it looks so much like realism on like an Italian level with, again, Pasolini and some of his other movies that look too real. And then you're sitting there going, it looked completely real. And then there's rumors going around, oh, that was real. And really, though it's a reenactment, you start to feel it's real, and that the director wanted to do that is a little uncomfortable, but I'll pass it. Orange is the New Black doesn't even take that extreme of approach. Although it does show the main character in solitary confinement. And while the main character is in solitary confinement, she almost loses her mind. And that's a similar theme to prison movies. And Shawshank Redemption and all these prison movies show us how hard prison can be. And again, prison, way, 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 way worse. I had a friend who went to prison. He said it wasn't a picnic. He says it wasn't a ball game. He says it wasn't easy. He said everybody gets on the level that they all think they're going to die basically every day. And so all my homies in prison, especially one I know, keep it real, man, because that can't be fun. But Orange is the New Black, that there's a romantic interest, kind of realistic, that they make it venerable in a mythological way, and all these films use the mythology, and that there's a little bit of impingement of maybe stereotypes, but more like archetypes in the characters of even Battlestar Galactica all the way through Orange is the New Black. Isn't characteristic, though, of the stereotypes shown again in Birth of a Nation. That making a real Civil War movie would be like a disaster film is really one of the points of Birth of a Nation that make it a decent film, that it is a disaster film and that everything falls apart and it's like an act of God, although it's the Civil War and nobody knows which side they're on. But in Orange is the New Black, like I was saying, and see around everything's kind of like this peace and love, but like distract you from the fact that we're going to kill some chicks because they're breaking the rules that we didn't tell them, but they should have known, but there was no way to know them. And they go after each other in even these fights and pretty intense scenes. Well, by the time that season 8 comes out, you're waking back up the next day watching season 8 on your marathon trip. And marathons are where you watch all the shows as quick as you can. I had a marathon show with a friend of mine named Brian, and we watched all of Dallas. We watched all of Dallas, the whole series. Or maybe just a season. No, we only watched a season, excuse me. We watched season 3 or something, and we saw the whole thing all the way through, and there were like dozens of episodes. And it took us a lot of time to see all the episodes. But in a marathon, like where you spread it out into like a week and a half, like Brian and I were doing, is good. But that we watched Orange is the New Black all the way through from beginning to end was because we were all hooked on it. But by the time the riot's going in season 8, I'm saying what I'm saying now, and that is that we've got to go. It's getting crunchy, and I don't know if I can make it through another episode. That was like all these shows, even the Twilight Zone marathon, and I strongly recommend TV show marathons and buying these box sets. And I wish I had more than Battlestar Galactica on TV, and I've had other TV discs, and I probably could hunt around the place and look for TV discs. You know, I'm sure they showed Tales of Hoffman and other opera movies on PBS, and if they haven't, maybe I'll go demand it as an intern, which really wouldn't get me much. except for sure we'll show Tales of Hoffman in 2026. No, I'm kidding. But anyways, we've had a really good lecture today. I don't want to give too much. Like I said, I was going to talk about them a little, but the aesthetics of these shows, especially in Games of Thrones and Orange is the New Black, is up to date with contemporary cinema terms, if not beyond. Some of the techniques of contemporary cinema take from TV, they're no longer ashamed of. That TV is now an art form that the cinema typically expects to show, like Matrix shit that we can jump into, like virtual reality, is all paid for by showing these Megatron screens and selling these big screen TVs that are smart televisions to people at their home. And that's what I was saying about the original invention. It was made for home use after he used it to look at his corn crops, and then here we are using it for all these different things with cameras everywhere. And now we're all on the internet going, wow, looking back on TV seems a lot harder. But the internet's a really hard place too, and that Game of Thrones and Orange is the New Black, where Netflix shows that they were streamers on the internet, is still controversial because SAG is still on strike, and the Writers Guild that I helped the social media page with, that I managed the social media page for the Writers Guild, well, you wouldn't believe this, but the Screen Actors are still on strike. The writers got off strike. They disabled AI, and all I gotta say is that actors need a higher pay scale for their streamers. Like, I don't need necessarily more money. It's not for me, but these guys with streamers that are producing shows that they want them to produce, and they're paying out of pocket and all this, and all they're asking is for some dough to make their next show. That'd be like necessary money anyway, and the Screen Actors Guild is going out of their way to be in streamers, but now there's a big debate on percentages that only an accountant could figure out about what to actually pay writers versus actors on streamers. But I thought they had that worked out with the Writers Guild. So something doesn't quite add up. Maybe I haven't been following the Screen Actors Guild strike enough. But if you're out there on strike, believe me, I was striking during the writer's strike while covering it on the social media. It wasn't easy. I thank you all for being part of it. I'm glad the company was cool with us. I was cool with the company and the union, and everybody got it done. And then it took a long time, was because these streamer problems are like hard to figure out, accounting mathematic. And I'm not an accountant, but I can account for a few things. The TV and the internet have kind of merged, and now it's the TV internet because of Orange is the New Black and Game of Thrones. And those shows actually came out on DVD, and that's what I watched them on. Doesn't take from the fact that they originated on computer screens and or TV screens, which were these smart TVs that were booming Game of Thrones and Orange is the New Black Season 8 back to back to compare which one was more anarchic. And we'll talk more. Or was it Paper Tiger that took it to such a level of anarchy that they never showed the Paper Tiger painting that gave the title to something I don't understand in a code I'm not going to look up, but I love the fucking show.